Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. What I wanted to do today was do another speed draw for you guys, but I wanted to try something a little bit different in regards to how I'm presenting it. Generally, when I do speed draws, I go ahead and present the footage sped up for you, and I just do some commentation along with it. But today I wanted to talk about something that I did for this piece specifically, which is working on forced perspective and some foreshortening. So I don't want to spoil this piece too much. I'd rather just hop right into the speed draw, and I'll talk to you guys as we go. So the first thing we're gonna do for this sketch is the foreshortening aspect of the picture. And in order to do that, I have her hand way down at the bottom of the page coming towards the viewer. So if you are the viewer on this piece and I'm the one that you're viewing, in order to foreshorten my hand, I want to bring it out towards you, and you can see that my hand is now a lot larger in comparison to my face if you're just looking at this on a flat surface. This is foreshortening, making objects that are closer to the camera appear a lot larger than objects that are farther away from the camera. I can do the same with my hand in the background here, and now it looks a lot smaller than my hand that is level with my face. So I've done this in the sketch by taking her right hand and bringing it down towards the bottom of the canvas, and I have made that inhumanly large. It looks very strange in just the sketch here. It just kind of looks like she has a really, really big hand, but there's gonna be a few more tricks along the way to make it look like the hand is coming towards you instead of just being abnormally large. One of those tricks you can see right off the bat is her arm is also getting progressively larger as it gets closer to the camera. So her shoulder and upper arm are about the correct size that they should be, but as we go down onto her forearm, since her forearm is coming towards the camera, it is getting slightly bigger from the elbow to the wrist than it should be, and then continuing on with the hand to make the hand even larger. And that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing this foreshortening, is to make sure that it's not only the object that is in front of the camera that is extra large, you also want to make sure that anything connecting that object to your character progressively grows bigger as well. Now that the basic sketch is done, we're just cleaning up some of the lines on the sketch, make them a little bit more readable. For this character, I'm not too worried about the details in the muscle definition and the bones on the hand, the tendons on the hand, things like that, because I know she's going to be wearing a latex bodysuit, and that suit is going to come from her arm down to her fingers. So I'm not too worried about foreshortening all the details in the hands, like the fingernails, the wrinkles, the tendons, all that stuff, because it's all going to be covered. We're just focusing today on getting the shape right. All right, and just starting in with the line art here, we're going very basic at first. I did, in addition to the foreshortening, want to be viewing this character from an upward angle. I was having a little trouble with this, with the eyes specifically, because I'm very used to drawing eyes from a front-on angle. So for this one, I think my biggest trick that I did was drawing the underside of the eyelid. As you can see I'm doing here, I'm actually including the underside so that if you were looking up, you could see underneath the eyelashes where that ridge of the eyelid would actually meet the eyeball itself. I tried to include that. Same with the nose. I'm trying to make sure it's as upturned as possible. Even though I don't want to look directly into the nostrils, it's just not a very appealing thing to see in any drawing. I did want to make the nostrils pretty large and angular to give the appearance that we were looking up at the character from underneath. The camera is here, so you're going to be looking directly up into the nostrils. I will say, I think I kind of lost the upward angle when it comes to the hair. I think I did the hair just a little bit too head on, too forward facing. And I did struggle a lot with the chin and jawline as well. Drawing a chin from underneath is a very, very difficult thing to do because we are so used to seeing a jawline head on. We're used to seeing it disconnected from the neck. But if you're drawing a chin from underneath, there's this whole section here underneath the jawline that you have to be aware of. And I find that so difficult to translate to a 2D piece of art without making it look really bizarre. So that's just something that I have to work on. And I wasn't too worried about the ears and hair being from the downward angle. It's not, I don't think it was gonna be especially crucial. The only thing I wish I had included, because of her haircut, you would have been able to see a little bit of like underneath her hair from the backside, if that makes sense. Like her hair would be coming around in this almost bowl cut shape, you should be able to see the back of the hair as well as it comes around the back of the neck, which unfortunately I didn't include, and that's just something I wish I had included in this piece. Going in with the hands here. Now this, I'm already setting up for a bit of a foreshortening trick to do in the future. I am actually making the line art from about the elbow to the fingers. It is separate from the line art for the rest of the body. And I'm going to be doing the same for the hand in the background too. The hand that is all the way back here, that line art is going to be separate from the body as well. So in the end, I'm going to have 3 separate line arts, one for the foreground, one for the midground, and one for the background. And that's just to help me later on when we get into the blurring effect of the forced perspective. I'm not sure how well my camera is going to capture it, but something, there we go. You can see my camera is focused on my face. Something much, much closer to the camera, like my hand here, is going to be a really out of focus in comparison. We do want to make sure we capture that like blurred effect of something out of focus if you're focusing on the midground. So in order to prepare for that, I do keep the line art separate from the foreground to the middle ground to the background, and it just makes the process a lot easier in the final steps. All these little stripes on the body here, just as a part of the character, they are going to be glowing, which was a little bit of an added challenge for me because in addition to the forced perspective and the foreshortening, I did want to also try and practice drawing latex on a character. It's not something I've ever done before, and I wanted to try my hand at it. I found this really great tutorial on Twitter, and I thought I might be able to do it. I think it turned out pretty good, to be honest. It's not the best work I've ever done, but I think it was pretty great for a first try. But in addition to the challenge of the foreshortening and the forced perspective, the reflection of the glowing bits of her costume in the latex was also something that I was going to have to contend with. Now, I am just gonna speed through most of the coloring here because a lot of it is not relevant. The only thing that you need to know that I did for the forced perspective of this piece is, again, I kept everything separate. So all the coloring I did for the midground, I kept in one layer folder. All the coloring I did for the foreground, I kept in another layer folder, and all the coloring I did for the background, I kept in a 3rd layer folder. So I'm working in 3 separate sections in order to get that foreshortening effect at the end when we start adding some out of focus blurriness to the piece. And it was also right around this point that I did decide to add a 3rd challenge to this picture. In addition to the foreshortening and forced perspective and the glowing reflection in the latex, which I have never drawn before, I also decided it would be really cool for this character to be in kind of like a backlit black light, to be backlit. I also thought it would be cool for this character to be backlit by a black light, just to kind of experiment with it a little bit. Again, something I've never done before, but I figured if there was a character to do it with, it would definitely be this one. She's got that very like futuristic cyberpunk vaporwave kind of aesthetic going on with her. Black light suited her perfectly. And I did go over it a few times. This purple and blue thing going on here is definitely not the final product. I think I actually completely redid it and redrew the areas that the black light was going to be affecting. And I ended up coming up with a decent combination for how to make the black light look like it was glowing without actually affecting the shading of the character. So I took this robin's egg blue that I used to make the backlight reflection. I set it to 25% opacity, and then I duplicated that layer at 100% opacity and put the overlay blending mode on that 100% layer, and it really created this very soft but also very stark contrast that didn't interfere with the shading of the character. I was very happy with it. It looked like a backlight. It looked like a blacklight effect without interfering too much with the shading that I was doing. And you can see a little clearer now also where the parts of the costume are that are going to be glowing. Everything that is bright pink on the costume is supposed to be giving off light, so the latex closest to that is going to have a bit of that light reflection in it, which I was very nervous to do, but again, I think it turned out pretty good. I'm fairly happy with it. Here we go, redoing that blue color. Again, I use the technique of taking this blue light layer, setting it to 25% opacity, duplicating it at 100% opacity and putting an overlay blending layer on top of it to give it that kind of really soft but still vibrant translucency that I was looking for. Took me some time to figure that out, but I finally got there. And then I also added this just like purple gradient around the edges. I was kind of iffy about it at first, but when I did finally get it to the point where it was working for me, I think it really added to the black light effect and not just a blue backlight. And again, here we go. Each section that I have is being colored separately. So the foreground here, I am coloring separately from what I just did in the midground. And then the background is also going to be colored separately from the midground and the foreground. So I will have 3 separate layers, foreground, midground, and background, which again, are going to help me in the final steps of this process. Here I'm going in with the shading. I started off way too dark at first. I thought it was gonna help me get that like black light effect, but I later changed it back to my normal pink purple shading color. And for the shading, I didn't really do anything too different. I just tried to make sure that I paid attention to the fact that there were going to be 2 different light sources, the black light behind her and the regular light source in front of her. Other than that, it was just very basic cell shading like I do for all of my speed draws. At this point, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the shading for the latex specifically. I had this tutorial that I wanted to follow, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that the shading was also done in my style so that it matched the rest of the character, and it didn't look like the latex was standing out on its own because the shading style was different. So I ended up cell shading the latex just like the rest of the character, and then I did the latex tutorial that I had found. I'll go ahead and link it in this video as well. And I used the shading techniques on that over the top of the shading that I had already done, and I think it tied it all together quite nicely. I'm gonna fast forward through the rest of the shading here. It's not super interesting, it's not super relevant to the character. I really just want to get to the latex and glowing part and then finish up the foreshortening explanation for you guys. All right, so what we should have taken away from the first half of this is that in order to successfully execute some foreshortening and forced perspective, the 2 biggest elements you want to have in your drawing are going to be the items in the foreground are going to be closer and larger, and they are also going to be out of focus as well. So you do want to make sure that you have those separate layers for however many levels to your drawing you want. I have 3 in this one, foreground, middle ground, background, and so I have the 3 separate layer groups for each of those layers. Those are the 2 most important things you should have taken away from the first half of this in order to get your foreshortening down. And now we're going in here with the latex. I was following this tutorial by Kikosu on Twitter. I found it quite confusing at first, if I'm gonna be honest, but I mostly just tried to take the steps one at a time, copying for the most part what they were doing with this piece, and trying to translate it to my drawing as best as possible. I definitely had to do a lot of trial and error with this, a lot of starting and stopping and going and erasing and reworking and stuff like that. But I did eventually get it to a point that I am really, really happy with it, and I'm super, super excited to try this technique again. I think it worked so well. And it really helped to sort of wrap my head around the idea of the reflections and how they work in latex. I found it to be a really easy to read breakdown of how the different reflections worked. So how I read it, for example, was anytime the latex was close to itself, so for example, the fingers, how they're kind of closing in on themselves, there was going to be a little bit of a reflection of the latex back into the latex on the opposite finger or the opposite hand. And then also anytime there was any really intense light reflecting off of the latex, that was going to be extremely shiny as well, because latex is so slick and so smooth that the light doesn't diffuse across the whole piece. It really just stays in one position. And then I think this was really the trick that sealed the deal for me, was doing this secondary highlight of just the reflected light on the piece. So I decided to use just pink for this. In the tutorial, there's like a pink light and a blue light where the latex is reflecting natural light versus skin. For this one, I decided to just use the pink for wherever the latex was reflecting the neon pink bands on the character's clothing. I think it worked super, super well. I'm so excited to try this exact same technique on a different character where I can experiment with the lighting a little bit more, because the lighting on this one was so insane that I really just decided to make the latex reflections as minimal as possible so as not to overwhelm myself. But yeah, this pink highlight really, really sealed the deal for me. It just made it look so shiny and so reflective. I was so happy with it. A+ job. And then just going in with the ultra shiny bits of the latex. The one thing I learned about drawing latex is it's just shine upon shine upon shine. Every layer is just another layer of slickness and another layer of reflection and shininess. So I did actually skip the last couple of steps in the tutorial because I thought it was gonna be too much for this piece. I thought it was just gonna be a little bit too busy with all the other lights and extra features I had planned. So I stopped at the point immediately after adding this really intense highlight. I went in again with a shine layer and I did just a little bit of glow over everything, a little soft airbrush over the really intense highlights, and that just finished it up so beautifully for me. I decided to stop there and move on to the rest of the drawing. All right, and now that the latex is done and nice and shiny, I'm just going in again and adding the soft shading on the rest of the character, which I skipped because I was so excited to get this latex done. I usually don't do highlights before I do the soft shading, but I made an exception in this point because I really wanted to get that latex in. I had so much fun with that. A+ tutorial, will definitely be using this technique again. So the soft shading on this, I didn't do as much as I normally would for a character like this because so much attention is being taken up by the latex and the foreshortening and the colors, and just there's so much going on in this picture. I didn't want to overwhelm the viewer by giving her any really heavy shading as well. So we just did some very light soft shading. We're going in with some even lighter highlights for her. I think I did just a couple very soft highlights on the face, some on the shoulders, and that was about it. And then I did the highlights for the hair and some rim lighting on the black light side of her face. But again, I didn't want to go overboard because I was getting overwhelmed with how much was on this picture. I didn't want any viewers to get overwhelmed as well. And then after all the highlights on the hair are done, I do go in with that final glitter layer, as I call it. I do the reflections in the eyes, the like big white spots. And then I also did a massive reflection on the hair to make it like extra shiny. I ended up taking that away, but it's gonna stay there for a while because I didn't decide until after I had already done all the forced perspective that it was too much. I did not like it. So it'll go away in the end, but I just do all the forced perspective first. Just doing a little bit of tidying up on spots that I missed. There's that glitter layer, and there's that really intense highlight on the hair. I thought I could get away with it because the rest of the suit was so shiny, but I felt it was just way too distracting. And then last but not least, before we're getting into the forced perspective here, I'm making all the pink bits glow. And the way that I did that is I just duplicated the layer that all the pink was on. I put a small Gaussian blur on it, I think by like 25%. And then I set that layer to shine, or I think it's add in Photoshop, and I just adjust it as needed, throwing in a quick dark background there to set everything off. I do make the background a little bit lighter in the end because I think the darkness was blending into the latex a little bit, sort of raving it out with all the color changes here. All right, and here we are with our final steps. This one took a minute because I did actually end up going back and editing a couple things. But what I've done is, remember those layer groups? Remember the 3 layer groups? What were they? Foreground, middle ground, background. What I did is I collapsed those 3 layer groups. So I have one flat layer that is all the hand. It's the line art, the coloring, the shading, the whole hand in the foreground. I have one flattened layer for the hand in the background, and I have one flattened layer for the midground. And so what I did is I took the foreground layer and I put a very slight Gaussian blur on it. For the foreground layer especially, unless it is in your face, such as this, you don't want a really big Gaussian blur on it because it's going to become a distraction. You just want it very slight, which is what I did. I think I only did like 10%. Same on the backhand. Again, I only put a 10% Gaussian blur on that. You can go a little heavier on the hand in the back because it is further away, it's more out of focus. But the one on the front you want to be careful on because if you blur it too much, it'll become a point of focus instead of the midground, which you want to focus on. And like I said, I kind of went back and forth on this because I wanted to go back and touch up a few things before I decided to make those final edits of blurring out the foreground and the background. And then my final touch on this, because I still thought it wasn't popping out quite as much as I wanted it to from the background. I did add my signature outline to the whole piece. It's just a big black outline around the entire character to sort of stand her apart from the background. I did fix the highlighting on the hair. It was way too intense. I like it a lot better now, and that is the finished piece. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want more videos like this semi-tutorial, sort of figuring things out kind of presentation. If you want to see this art in full, it is on my Instagram. On Thursday, you can find it at Threadwing. I do also have other social accounts under TikTok and Twitch, again, Threadwing. And if you would like to see all my behind the scenes work, plus content early, plus videos early, plus live stream archives, plus exclusive content, you can find me on Patreon and subscribe for any tier amount. It is the best way to support me in this channel, and I will love you so much for doing so. And also make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can find your way back here for next week's video. I will see you all next week. Have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye!